Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most interesting and probably the most important updates are coming from the territory of France, where the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, made lots of statements right before the beginning of the European Summit that is taking place today on the 6th of March of 2025. So let's discuss them in details. And before we start, several military and political experts have already called these statements of Macron something like declaration of war to the Russian Federation. Peace will return to our continent only with the pacified Russia, that was stated by Macron. Currently, it's very difficult to understand what exactly does it mean pacified Russia, but I believe that most likely Macron was talking about Russia without forces, without rockets, without missiles, without nuclear weapons, without everything, just Russia and its resources. And that's it. Obviously, France will never get this. Another important statements made by Macron. He was speaking out against peace in Ukraine on the current terms. He was talking about supporting sending European Union's troops to Ukraine after peace. He proposed to start a discussion on the use of French nuclear weapons to protect all of Europe, and he stated that his army, French army, is the most capable in Europe, and France have nuclear weapons that provide them with protection. Macron said that Europe would respond to tariffs from the United States of America. Also, Macron made several statements regarding the future. Probably the French intelligence make their own projections and speculations about the things, how they are going to be developed by the 2030. And he said that Russia plans to mobilize 3 million soldiers, and that the Russians are planning to produce 4,000 tanks. Obviously, if the Russians indeed are going to do all these things that were projected by Macron, obviously the European Union and France itself needs to find a solution how to strengthen their positions. Furthermore, Macron stated that he wants to believe that USA will remain at the European side, but they also have to be ready if the United States is no longer by the French side. So these are the statements that were made by Emmanuel Macron, and also the most important one that he said that he accused Russia of violating the Minsk agreements in 2014. He said that agreements with Moscow cannot be trusted, but I'll remind you that right before or during the beginning of the special military operation, the former Chancellor of Germany stated that this is Germany and France and the European countries this is the side that violated the Minsk agreement because they were preparing Ukraine before this war, and the main purpose of those agreements were to strengthen the Ukrainian positions. So this is the situation. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the European countries, France and the United Kingdom, they don't have a lot of time because the United States of America continue cutting Ukraine from the intelligence information. Today we got reports and we continue receiving different reports from different military experts. For example, the Economist Oliver Carroll's report that US stopped transmitting intelligence to Ukraine at 2 p.m. Kyiv time, 3 p.m. Moscow time, including target designation for the HIMARS missile systems. The target designation for long-range targets has also been disabled. Although this sounds very tempting, it is worth remembering that absolutely all targets hit by Ukrainian armed forces with American weapons are strictly coordinated with US command via various communication channels. So basically, right before the beginning of the most decisive and the most vital part of the special military operation we're talking about these days, Ukrainians are completely blind and a little bit deaf. Currently, they have no help, let's say, help from the United States of America. And we know that the European Union will not be able to restore and to replace the intelligence that was provided by the United States of America. As for the current situation, the United Kingdom Defense Secretary is to travel to US to discuss the parameters of a European peace plan in Ukraine. Gilly will arrive in Washington on March 5th, so most likely he has already arrived to present to the Trump Trump administration the proposals of Europe and Britain for resolving the conflict in Ukraine developed at the summit in London last week. And I remind you that according to this plan, nobody is going to discuss and negotiate this plan with the Russian Federation. According to European plan, according to London's plan, Russia will be just notified with this plan, and according to European countries, they believe that Russia will accept this. Furthermore, we got another important statement that the United States will continue to suspend weapon supplies and intelligence sharing with Ukraine until a date for peace talks with Russia is set. White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said. You know that currently the United States of America have a lots of problems, not just Ukraine. For example, we start receiving very interesting and very rare statements made by the US and Chinese representatives. For example, the USA doesn't want war with China, but we will be prepared for this. This was stated by the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and China from their side made almost the same mirroring statement. We are prepared for war. We are rebuilding our military, we are re-establishing deterrence, we live in a dangerous world, and we want to deter war with Chinese or others. We have to be strong. My job as a Secretary of Defense is to make sure we're ready for war. Pat Hegseth stated, he is Secretary of Defense, responding to the recent comments by Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Chinese Embassy in the United States. We're not saying that the war between China and the United States of America are going to happen, but obviously if both sides doesn't want this war to happen, both sides need to be powerful, need to have very strong positions. But with Ukraine, most likely the United States of America will not be able to restore their force and their strength. They need to cut this ballast, they need to cut Ukraine from them, and maybe then they will have chances to restore their military capabilities. Now let's discuss the situation in Ukraine. We have lots of very interesting updates, and first let's talk about the Sudzha direction, where the Russians continued their offensive operation. By the morning of the 6th of March of 2025, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the settlement of Kirillovka was almost captured by the Russians. So most likely the next several days, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information. This is another step from the Russian side in the direction of the main supply route, in the direction of one of the supply roads, the road between the city of Sudzha itself and the small settlement of Miropolye. Anyway, despite the fact that there are still several kilometers to this line from the edge positions of the armored forces of Russian Federation, less than 5 kilometers. Anyway, despite of this fact, the Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over the main supply road, and today we got lots of videos of how the Russians were attacking and destroying the Ukrainian vehicles along this line. So this line was already cut by the Russians as well. The main activities during the previous 24 hours took place exactly in the northern part, in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Mala Loknya. The number of updates that we got from this territory during the previous night tell us that most likely today the Russians, during the European summit that is taking place today, is going to take place today, the Russians launched their major offensive operation, decisive offensive operation, with the purpose to break the Ukrainian defense and to take under control the entire settlement. During the previous 24 hours, lots of vehicles were damaged and destroyed in this part. Most likely during the day we're going to receive additional updates from this direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupyansk area. The Ukrainians try to show their forces as the forces that still have possibilities to counterattack the Russians and to restore positions. So during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians continued their counterattacks in the northeastern part of the city of Kupyansk, and according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over additional forests between the settlement of Dvorichne and Zapadne. If this information is correct, then most likely the road R79 is currently in the complete fire control or maybe even physical control. We have one geolocation from the western part of Dvorichne. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians in this part of the settlement of Dvorichne. Now we understand more or less where exactly the edge line, the line of combat contact goes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving lots of very important updates about the current situation in this area. The Ukrainian sources published a video of the city of Toretsk itself. As you can see, the settlement was almost reduced to ruins, but despite the fact that the settlement was about to be almost reduced to ruins, the Ukrainians, before the beginning of this European summit, decided to counterattack the Russian forces, and as a result of counterattacks that had been taking place for the previous 3-4 days, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions significantly. The Ukrainians managed to restore up to 15% of the settlement of the city of Toretsk, and for example, according to different sources, according to neutral mappers, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the northern mine of the city, which is very important stronghold, and we see that the Russians were forced to fall back. Also, the Ukrainian sources published lots of videos of how they were after withdrawing the Russians probably before the beginning of this offensive, and this video is very important because this video allow us to understand where is the line of combat contact goes. So we see that probably this is more or less the situation in this direction. Furthermore, according to the same neutral mappers, the Russians have begun retreat process from the northwestern part of the city towards the central parts, towards more reliable positions. So if Ukrainians continue the same, most likely during the next several days, the armed forces of Ukraine will be able to restore control over everything that is currently located to the north of this yellow line. So most likely the battle for Toretsk is going to start once again. As for now, the most important thing for the Russians is not to allow the Ukrainians to enter the mine, the central mine, this one, because if Ukrainians are able to restore control over this territory as well, then the Russians will be forced to start almost everything from the beginning, and the battle for Toretsk will take another 2-3 months for the Russians to restore their lost positions. So the situation here is very critical. From the other side, the Ukrainians launched another counter-offensive operation in the vicinity of Vozdvizhenka. The Ukrainian sources published lots of videos of how they were attacking and storming the Russian positions in this part of the settlement. We have lots of geolocations that confirm at least the edge positions of the armed force of Russian Federation. But anyway, according to neutral mappers, as a result of offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over the tree lines and the forests between the settlement of Vodyana Druga, Baranovka and Zelene Polye. So based on the reports published by neutral mappers, we have adjusted the map in a contested area. So this territory was recaptured by the Ukrainians. As for now, without any geolocations that can confirm this, but obviously we will keep an eye on this situation. The Ukrainians also continue their counter-offensive operation in the area of Shevchenka and in the area of Uspenovka. According to neutral mappers, the settlement of Uspenovka was completely recaptured by the Ukrainians, and the Russians were forced to fall back towards the settlement Novovasilievka. And this is the next task and the next target of the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, after a successful first attempt to attack the settlement of Shevchenka, and after the Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper in the southeastern part, the Russians began their own counterattacks with the purpose to restore control over this part of the settlement. Because if the Russians are not able to restore control over this part of Shevchenka, the Russians most likely will lose any supply and support of their forces in this pocket. As we understand, the Ukrainians are trying to cut this salient, or maybe even to cut the Russians in Cauldron. Now let's move further. As for Bogatyr direction, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions between the settlement of Constantinople and Ulakli. There are still very heavy clashes on the territory of Constantinople. The Ukrainians still have access to this part of the settlement, and we still continue receiving videos of how the Russians are trying to secure this part of the settlement. When talking about the South Donetsk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and by the morning of the 6th of March of 2025, we start receiving first reports that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the outskirts of the settlement of Zelene Polye. So basically today the battle for this small village has begun. This is very important. We see that the Russians are not going to stop. At the same time, the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation in the settlement of Vysyola, trying to stop the Russians and not to allow them to attack this settlement from the south. But the Russians have already established complete FPV drone control over the main supply roads, and everything that enters this territory can be destroyed by the Russians without any problems. Now let's move further. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians carried out several powerful blows, several powerful attacks in the southern part of Ukraine. We have another video from the city of Gulay Pole, and since the beginning of March, the Russians intensified their activities exactly in this area, and everything tells us that maybe the Russians will try to break the Ukrainian defense in this part of Ukraine as well. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians attacked the city of Kryvyi Rog, and as a result of explosion, another hotel was almost completely destroyed. This is the moment of explosion. This is the moment when the Russian Iskander missile arrived on the destination. According to information we have, and according to Zelensky, there was a meeting of Ukrainian, French, and the United Kingdom volunteers in this hotel, and the Russians destroyed this meeting. The Zelensky stated that volunteers managed to survive, but there are casualties among civilians, according to Zelensky. Furthermore, the Russians attack port infrastructure in the vicinity of Odessa. This is 4th or 5th day in a row when the Russians bomb Ukrainian infrastructure and facilities in the Odessa region. Most likely the Russians are trying to destroy warehouses, maybe some ships. That's most likely the Western countries, United Kingdom and France, sent to Ukraine with weapons. So the situation escalates, as we can see, and most likely during the upcoming day, we're going to receive a lot of very interesting updates. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.